It's about probably 4 years now when I was having coffee with a friend in Essex, Vermont, and we were coming up to Lent, coming up to Ash Wednesday, and I was excited by it. And I told him that Lent and Good Friday were my favorite parts of the Christian liturgical year. And he was like, "You're a sick puppy." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Lent is a 40-day orgy of guilt for overwrought Christians. And it doesn't do you any good at all, except make you feel bad about yourself." He didn't say bad, he had a much better adjective. And I didn't have any quick theological or philosophical stuff to come back with him with, so we just agreed to disagree. But I want to share tonight a little bit why I think he's wrong. Or at least there's another way of looking at it. And I'm going to use two existentialist philosophers, and a poet. The philosophers are Viktor Frankl, a philosopher who, by luck and character, survived the death camps of the Holocaust and went on to write a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And the other is Albert Camus. Frankl said the one thing we can do in a world filled with evil is make a choice for how we live even in the midst of it. And Camus, in a similar vein, asked the existentialist question. He said, to decide whether life is worth living is to answer the fundamental question of philosophy. Everything else, he said, is a cakewalk. To continue to live despite persistent world weariness was his great struggle. But here's the thing Camus said that is a lesson for us tonight. He said that happiness, or I'd use the word joy, because we tend to think of that as a deeper emotion, cannot be attained by direct pursuit of it. In fact, I would make the point that that is the great failure of our consumer capitalist culture, is that we're all told to go after happiness by buying stuff. Camus says that joy or happiness is a byproduct of living with authenticity and integrity. And for Frankl, too, the choices we make in the midst of the Holocaust, in the midst of what's happening in Ukraine and in Gaza, the new echoes of authoritarian regimes all over the world and in our own nation, we can either choose to go into cynicism and despair, or quest for a life of meaning and thus of joy. And he says we have a choice, no matter the external circumstances, for sober, clear-eyed, hard-working, meaningful life. and thus joy. What I should have said 4 years ago to my friend was that this is what Lent does for us. Every year. It is not, as Barb reminded us on Sunday, Lent is not an opportunity for New Year's Resolution 2.0, which I usually mess up by January 3rd. Lent is not a small m moral victory over chocolate. And it is also not, as my friend thought, a perverse celebration of how depraved and sinful we are. Although some religious traditions can certainly make it seem like that. I think Lent is the realization that there are only two common human experiences. One is our mortality. That there's a set limit on how we occupy time and space. And I see it as not just a framework for our lives, but actually like a frame around which we have an opportunity to create a life of meaning and joy. And I use the word create very purposely because that's our second common reality with every other human being on earth, is that we are created in the image of God, in the imago Dei. Now, a lot of our liturgy spends a lot of time talking about our being dust. I'll posit that's not a negative. And we are made in the image of God, meaning we also are not only moral agents like God is, but we are also able to create. God creates. We create. We have an opportunity, no matter what the external reality we live in, we can create a life of meaning and even joy, even in the midst of the reality of sin and sickness and death and disorder. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. That will be the words we say as the grit of last year's palms are pressed into our furrowed brow. We are dust is both what Genesis tells us, dirt, Adam, our adamah is what Genesis says God used to create adamah. A wonderful pun of our being dustlings, earthlings, critters. Genesis says we are dust. And so does Carl Sagan. We are stardust. We are dust. We are mortal. We are living in the midst of a world that is imperfect and is subject to anarchy, disorder, sickness, and death. We're not called to be paralyzed by it. We're not called to be satisfied with it, and we're not called to be cynical in the midst of it. We're called to live a life of meaning and joy in the midst of it. And Lent is our 40 days to be honest, and wrestle with how we do that. So the question for us tonight, the question for you from Camus, from Frankl, from Mary Oliver, and from the God who gave you life, and the rabbi from Nazareth who redeems your life, the question is, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?